Everything is changing in tech, innovation, and business. New launches, new playbooks, new power shifts every single day. This is Testardi, a snapshot of the news, ideas, and decisions shaping what comes next. Every episode, we break it down into what changed, what it means, and why it matters, so you can stay curious, but with a stubborn edge. Alright, welcome to Testardi MWM, our first episode of 2026. I'm Jonathan Leoni, and today we explore how Formula One is rewriting its own playbook for the upcoming season. The rules, the tech, and what all of this signals as the sport steers toward bigger plans for 2030. Every few years, F1 hits a moment where it deliberately presses reset. Usually, big changes in the sport aren't caused by specific issues, rather because F1 is constantly trying to balance three major areas at the same time: technology tied to performance, relevance, and providing audiences a racing spectacle that keeps people watching from lights out until the very last lap. However, the 2026 changes are huge. It's not just about slight adjustments. These updates are destined to cause chain reactions thanks to the introduction of smaller cars, new aero behavior, new overtaking tools, and a different hybrid philosophy in developing the cars, other than a major push on sustainable fuel. Oh, and of course, to top it all, even having new characters joining the grid. And that's the blueprint of today's topics. We break down what's happening to understand what to expect moving forward. Let's start from one of the most important aspects of the sport. You see, fans and businesses around this industry chase the dream of crafting races that keep the audience on the edge of their seat. Cars racing close together, pressure, unpredictability, and authentic wheel to wheel battles. But from an engineering point of view, the mission in theory is quite similar, just in a different way. And that is to build the quickest package over a full race distance, manage the car so it safely arrives at the flag in one piece, with constant top performance that wins races. That includes making the car stable for the driver and making power, fuel usage, and tires as efficient as possible. Those views aren't necessarily contrasting though, they're just pulling towards the same goal, but at times from different directions. The plan for 2026 cars is to make them smaller and lighter than what we've seen so far, with a meaningful drop in minimum weight and reduced dimensions by about 5%. Don't be fooled here. This is not just about materials and aesthetics, of course. This affects how the car responds to inputs, how it rotates, how it behaves under stress when it's running in a pack, or through the fastest sections of any given circuit. Now, one of the biggest shifts is how downforce is generated, as we can expect a different performance profile altogether. Less of that glued to the road feeling in the fastest corners, and more emphasis on efficiency, especially on exits and straights. Plus, a car concept that aims to work better when it's following another car closely, where the promise is to deliver more close action to the big screen. And that brings us to one of the most invisible changes here. We essentially say goodbye to DRS as we know it in this new era of Formula One. Instead, we see the rise of active aerodynamics, a new system of its own, allowing movable front and rear wing elements to switch between two configurations depending on the part of the lap. The simplest way to picture this is this. You have one configuration for corners with higher downforce called Z mode, and another one for straights with lower drag called X mode. Their activation is handled through defined sections on the track. And most importantly, this straight configuration isn't only an overtaking gimmick. Once again, it's also there to help the overall energy efficiency picture, because this year's power units also see updates in deployment and recovery. Not to mention that, in addition to this, race control is able to manage how and where these modes are allowed, including restrictions in tricky conditions for safety reasons. Now we get to a few new concepts which we will start hearing constantly as they are set to become the talk of the town moving forward. These are boost, overtake, and recharge. Boost is a mode that lets the driver unlock the maximum combined performance from the power unit, engine plus electrical, for a short period of time. This is assuming you have enough stored electrical energy available, of course, and it's available anywhere on the lap, not just in specific zones. Drivers can use it to either attack or defend, wherever it makes sense, but it's limited by the energy left in the tank. In any case, you can think of it as a full power button for the hybrid system. Overtake mode instead is more situational. It's designed to help the chasing driver when they are close enough behind their adversary, specifically within 1 second at detection point, so the car in pursuit can sustain stronger electrical deployment and build a speed advantage to attack. Now, here's where it gets interesting, the recharge concept. Because 2026 regulations lean so much more into the electrical side of the hybrid system. With a near 50-50 split concept between combustion and electric, the car needs to refill its battery during a lap in order to later spend the harvested energy on the other modes. This process typically happens when the car brakes and sometimes when lifting off the throttle, storing the output in the battery. It goes without saying that this will not impact every single corner. Teams will set recharge targets throughout the circuits as part of the overall race strategy. Speaking of, these updates immediately raise an important strategic question. How do you keep enough charge available across a race without going too far and turning the entire race into a battery economy management sport where the winning driver is not the fastest anymore, but the most efficient? Of course, if this is well developed, it just adds an additional layer of complexity and chess to the racing. Different drivers in different energy states, different timing of attacks, and more chances for an actual fight. Finding the correct balance in tech development and FIA regulations, like adjusting activation zones, will be key for the sport to thrive. In the best version of this season, we will basically get more variety. And come to think of it, the hardcore fans may find some of these updates familiar already. Formula E, where Gen 4 design is set to make its debut soon, has used attack mode for years. A defined driver-activated power increase used strategically during races, with the FIA deciding different setup parameters for each event. Sounds familiar? So conceptually, you can see a certain degree of resemblance, bringing the two titles a little closer. Both championships now use structured power deployment features, and both make all of the mentioned aspects an increasingly important part of the racecraft. But let's move on. There's one more major pressing topic that we should be eager to discuss, and that is the sustainable push we are seeing. Because this is a key pillar in the roadmap to 2030. From this year, we go all in on advanced sustainable fuel, with strict requirements too. Fuel has to come from sustainable sources, and it has to be made in a way that doesn't add new fossil carbon into the system. Let's not underestimate such an important aspect, as this is all about F1 playing the long game here. Because the sport needs to stay relevant to manufacturers, and that means keeping three things alive at the same time: hybrid development, cutting edge fuel tech, and real road impact. All this without giving up that top tier performance identity. Now, let me simplify real quick. The 2026 cars still work with combustion engines, so if you want cars to stay fast and move toward lower emissions, you have to turn to the fuel to change. And that's why sustainable fuel carries such major importance. If you can prove it works at the absolute limit of, let's say, 300 plus kilometers per hour with brutal reliability demands, you're not just making a cleaner racing fuel, you're stress testing a solution that could scale way beyond the grid. We can't expect the whole world to go full electric overnight, of course, as there are millions of existing cars and whole parts of transports where these solutions apparently aren't a clean fit just yet. However, these shifts send a clear signal, as perhaps this sustainable fuel will become the bridge we need, an effective way to reduce impact for the time being. After all, if we can make a high-performance hybrid system run on certified sustainable fuel pathways, that gives us new interest to manufacturers, partners, governments, and yes, future customers too. Speaking of manufacturers, that leads us perfectly into a new chapter, the arrival of a new joiner. In 2026, the grid expands to 11 teams and therefore 22 drivers with the arrival of Cadillac, tied to General Motors' involvement. The reason why this matters is because a new entry at this level represents a bet that the sport direction, technical and commercial, is worth the investment. But it's also about proving that the future can be both fast and smarter too. Let's also not forget about Audi entering the stage, taking full ownership of an existing team and aiming at competing at the very front from the get go. So, when we put everything together, we have more manufacturer identity, more industrial relevance, and more long term strategical decisions for the sport. For the fans, we have a new aero design, new overtake options, the central role of the kinetic motor generator unit, the push to adopt sustainable fuel, and the bigger focus on energy management. This isn't just a set of new rules, it's trying to shape a version of the sport where innovative technology angles make their way in a world ready to be heading towards 2030. Always thinking at a very long term positioning, keeping an eye on sustainability, hybrid relevance, and at the end of the day, providing a completely reshaped race product. We only know how well these layers will stack once the car actually start racing in March, because the teams are currently focused and engaged in testing their setups. And that brings us to the wrap up of the first episode of Testardi, Moves Worth Making. I sincerely want to thank you for listening this far. If you enjoyed this format, make sure to stay tuned and engage through the comment sections, because next time we'll zoom in on a new set of updates across our favorite industries, picking at the stars with only one question in mind: what's coming next? Have a great rest of the day. Ciao!